Guys, welcome back to the Heavenly Bread Podcast.
Yes. It's been so long, honestly.
Gosh,
what are we doing out here?
Last time we shot an episode was back before Christmas, and now we're at the end of January.
Yeah.
So a lot has happened. We have a lot to catch you guys up on. I hope you guys are caught up on the series, to be honest with you. Chris and I, we've been pumping out episodes. We've been talking about Jesus, having those conversations day in and day out, more like bi-weekly.
Yes. Yeah.
And bi-weekly
Day in,
out,
day out. Yeah.
day in and day out. And we're glad to be back with you guys. We feel like we got some fresh stuff to talk about with you guys. I pray that you're provoked by this episode, of course. If you're not following on social media, Charissa is a great director of social media.
Oh, thank you.
And I think you guys should follow. There's a lot of good content.
Yeah.
Chris is always spitting fire. We got other people on there like our girl Georgie.
Yes.
Just started doing TikToks with us. And then
We're going to get some more.
we're pulling people to the team more and more and more. And so you don't want to miss out on that stuff. And make sure you're tracking along with us in our Biblical Masculinity podcast. My friend Jordan and my friend Kevin, all three of us, we did a pretty controversial episode just this last weekend. So go check that out on our YouTube channel or Spotify, wherever you like to listen to your podcast. So without further ado, I figured, first of all, actually, everybody take a look and see what Charissa got me for Christmas.
Look what Nathan got me today from his cabinet.
Charissa thinks that I am the world's best boss, and I have to say, it really just moves my heart that that she would just bless me in this way. I don't know if I've ever had a Christmas present quite like it.
The thing is that Nathan as a person is like the sanctified version of Michael Scott. So it had to happen.
Yeah, that's probably one of the best compliments I've ever gotten.
I thought you'd like that. Yeah, it's good.
Well, anyways, jumping into the conversation, you guys know the mission statement. Charissa, why don't you remind anyone who's maybe new to the
It's been a
show?
long time, yeah.
It has. Do you remember it?
Yeah, I think I do, yeah. So we're Jesus people having Jesus conversations to provoke greater love for Jesus.
That's true. And so that's what we're about to do. Here's what we want to take you down this afternoon. So Charissa and I, over Christmas break, we were off doing our things. I was in Dallas. I was in Orlando. I was in Kansas City. I was in St. Louis. Charissa, she was traveling around too. What cities were you in?
I was just in Dallas and Illinois and brief stop in Denver in between.
Well, that's three different places.
Well, yeah. Big traveler.
So, but along the way, along our Christmas break journeys, we actually both went to two different conferences. Or she went to one, I went to one. Different conferences. I went to one down in Orlando with Jesus Image, if you're familiar with them. And that's the one we're going to talk about. Well, we're not really going to talk about the conference in and of itself as much as some things that really impacted myself and things that Charissa and I really love just in general about walking with the Lord, about the scriptures, about our life with Jesus. And so really the topic at hand is Christ crucified and suffering in relation to following the Lord. So let me take you down a little story time. Is that okay?
Let's do it.
So as soon as Christmas break started for us, this was about midway through December 17th or so, we finished here in the prayer room here in Denver, and we took 4 weeks off. But I immediately got on a plane, flew to Orlando to make it to a conference with my sister, and we got there, 2-day conference, and it was with this ministry called Jesus Image, and the whole conference was centered around Christ crucified. There were some awesome people there. Maybe you've heard of different ones. Michael Koulianos, Stephanie Gretzinger, Jeremy Riddle, Heidi Baker. But I got to tell you guys, one of the things that just impacted me so much at this particular conference, I feel like it gave me such a fresh perspective related to suffering for the name of the Lord. And I felt like I got to see with my own eyes these examples up there on ministering from the stage who had really for real suffered in a real way for the sake of the Lord. Couple of examples. Are you familiar with Heidi Baker?
Fairly. Not like super. I've listened to a little bit of her talking about, just what the work she's done.
So she was there. She's a real hero in the faith. She is, I think, in her late 60s, maybe a little older than that. But she's a missionary in Mozambique, Africa. She has a big missions organization where they take care of orphans in Africa. She's known just kind of around the charismatic Christian world. But so she ministered and she shared some things. Not only did she minister at the conference, but I went to church the next morning at Jesus Image, and she shared again Sunday morning. And she shared some things just in relation to some of the work that they're doing and how she has been beaten with rods for the sake of the Lord. She's been imprisoned. She has been spit upon. She has saved people that have been beaten and left for dead. Her ministry has recovered people who, people thought they were dead, but then they weren't by some miracle. Nursed those people back to health. But then at one point it was shared that a handful of her coworkers were recently murdered by some sort of terrorist organization there in Africa, had literally murdered some of her friends and coworkers out on the field. So what we're hearing these stories, right? And then the next person that gets brought on is Brother Yun. Have you ever heard of him?
Again, vaguely. I don't know a lot of people. I'm learning.
That's okay. So Brother Yun's probably even lesser known than Heidi Baker. But he is probably mid-70s, and he is an Asian man, I think from China. If you've ever heard of the book, The Heavenly Man, it's basically a biography all about him. The church in China refers to this man as the Chinese Apostle Paul.
Wow.
Because of just the vast impact that he has had on the church in China, specifically the underground church. So he was there with his son, who was about 40, and his son was his translator, which is really cool to watch. But Brother Yun, I was actually in 6th grade when I read his book called The Heavenly Man.
Oh, wow.
I never actually saw him in person until I was an adult. But I remember reading in his book about how he was imprisoned in a Chinese prison for sharing the gospel. Not only that, but he was there for 12 years. During that time, I mean, he got just the types of torture that he went through were just as unthinkable, described in his book. But there was one particular story where he laid on his side and he got so weak because he couldn't really eat or drink. He got so weak that he couldn't really get off his side. He just laid in one place. For a supernatural amount of time, he laid in one place without eating or drinking for over 60 days. Somehow stayed alive, but his ears shriveled up to the size of raisins, it says in the book. And then he would get kicked around and urinated on, all this stuff in the prison cell by his cellmates. They would mock him for being a Christian. And he basically shrivels up into nothing until one day, after 60 days of this, the Lord empowers him, comes upon him by the power of God. He stands up, and everyone in the cell was terrified, including the guards, because they had seen him just wither away to nothing. He stands up. They're terrified. He preaches the gospel. All of them get saved.
What?
And then days after, it was just like what you would read in the book of Acts. An angel shows up, opens up his jail cell, makes him invisible to the guards, and he walks right out the front door of the prison, out to the street where one of his friends was waiting for him with a car, and is just flabbergasted that his friend Brother Yun just walked out. He tells him, "I can't believe you're here. The Lord just told me to show up here today with my car."
Wow.
And here you are. And that's how he escaped prison.
Sure. Yeah.
So this is the
Wow.
guy speaking to the conference, right?
Sure.
First of all, why don't you comment on some of that stuff you just heard, by the way?
I don't know what to say to that. I'm like, am I saved? No, I'm kidding. I know I'm saved, but no, I think it's just, yeah, it holds a different weight when you hear people who've been through actual, like, intense physical persecution.
Yes.
Because that's not something we're, for the most part, familiar with seeing day to day
Yes.
in America. Like, we're not persecuted in that way for our faith right now. And so I think, one, it's even just a reminder of, like, this stuff is currently happening.
100%.
It's not just like, oh, back in biblical times it happened. Like,
right.
There's a persecuted church worldwide. Yeah, I mean, I haven't really heard their testimony yet, but I think that also just speaks to, like, there's a certain dependence that you tap into when you're under those circumstances.
Yes.
And where there's dependence and where there's need and reliance on the Spirit is where we actually see those supernatural break-ins.
Yes.
And anointings.
Oh my gosh, that reminds me of something I heard Francis Chan say one time. He's like, man, one time he was talking to the Lord. He's like, why haven't I ever seen fire fall from the sky like Elijah did? And then the Lord was like, well, you've never been up against 400 prophets of Baal that were going to kill you.
That's fair.
if I didn't do it.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, what you're saying, so much of the time we're in circumstances when honestly we don't need miracles to come to survive, or we don't need, signs and wonders in our everyday life. And so I think that's a good part of the reason why we don't see them that much, because we're very comfortable in our society in the Western world, and we have so many things that are just met already. And yet you start hearing these stories about people in different parts of the world, less developed places, where they're so much more reliant on the Lord. If he doesn't come through, they're screwed. And then you see so many more acts of the Lord, if you will, so much more activity of the Lord.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, all of a sudden you start hearing stories that it's like, man, I've read about this type of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
In this book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just a cool, kind of what a privilege it is for them to walk out. Sometimes it can make us feel like our relationship or our walk is peanuts.
Yeah.
For lack of better terms.
Yeah. But I think another aspect is this is where it's heading. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Like,
absolutely.
obviously the end times church as a whole is going to be experiencing this. And I think even if you're in a context where you're not currently experiencing these things that these people have experienced, I think it is just a reminder of would you be willing? Like, is
Yes.
that cost worth it to you? Like, is
Yes.
Jesus still worth it? Is Jesus the prize? Or like have the blessings or
Yes.
your comfortable life become what you value and esteem higher? Or if you were in that place, like
Yes.
would that be worth it to you? Would that be even rewarding? Like, I don't know. I think it's just because this is where the days are heading for the church. I think every heart just needs to be prepared
Yes.
for these kind of things.
100%. And I love that you're taking it there. That's what I felt like impacted me so much, as I felt like I saw examples of ones who had suffered greatly and endured. And you see that language in different passages like Matthew 24, where the Lord starts talking about, listen, tribulation is coming.
Yeah.
People are lawlessness is going to increase. People are going to betray one another. People are going to offer up their family members. And then, he lists several different things, and then it gets down to the end. He says, he who endures to the end will be saved.
Yeah.
And, he even says, if it says at one point in Matthew 24 that if those days had not been cut short, then no one would survive.
That's right.
because of how intense it's going to be. I want to share one more part about the conference. So I told you about Brother Yun, but even on top of that, Charissa, Brother Yun's mentor was there.
Okay.
So he's in his 70s, but then his mentor's in his 90s.
Amen.
A 90-year-old Asian man who Brother Yun was in prison for 12 years. His mentor was in Chinese prison for 25 years.
Oh, wow.
And, they told the story. He couldn't even speak English. So someone else told the story of his life, but how he was in prison and his wife, who he married in their youth, and in the love of God, left him. Not only did she leave him, but she left him for one of the communist leaders who was leading the way in persecuting the Chinese church. Just the mass betrayal that was experienced. But the way they honored these men and women, Charissa, it was so beautiful. And so then, the conference was Friday and Saturday. And then Sunday, we got to go to church. Heidi Baker spoke. And my sister, because she went to Jesus school the year prior, she knew a bunch of people, got us the best seats in the house.
Nice.
And so the first 3 rows were roped off for honored guests or whatever. And then the 4th row was where we were. So we were smack in the middle, 4th row. And so literally right in front of me, I could reach out and just touch his shoulder, was Brother Yun's mentor.
Wow.
And at the end of the service, I got to shake his hand, and he had a little translator next to him and was tell him different things. And I got to thank him for enduring the sufferings of the Lord and for being an example to myself and for not giving up.
Yeah.
And I just think it was quite possibly one of the greatest honors of my entire life, getting to shake his hand and getting to honor and bless him.
Yeah.
But I just walked away from the whole weekend so provoked, and I was like, man, I need examples of men and women who have suffered greatly and endured, because we're watching in our generation just friends of ours, people that we ran together with, and people all around fall away into compromise, into lawlessness, becoming victims of what the scriptures talk about, this great falling away. And it's so discouraging. I mean, and sometimes you look around and you're like, can anyone endure? Can anyone make it to the end? And so I felt so strengthened, and I'm like, man, I need that example. It strengthens me, but I actually want to be that example for the ones coming up after us. I want to be in my 70s and be able to testify that I have stood firm in the midst of persecution and any suffering that comes with following the Lord. Powerful, powerful weekend.
Yeah. I think as you're speaking, right, even the passage of those who endure to the end will receive salvation, and just the idea that we were saved, or being saved, we will be saved.
Yes.
And this endurance is a place that actually allows us to see the Lord's salvation. So I'm almost thinking man, am I living in such a way that allows me to see the Lord's salvation?
Wow.
Or am I living so dependent on the flesh, or so comfortable, or in things that I can accomplish and I can get done? Or am I choosing the places to be weak, the places to wait, the places to endure, that I might actually see the salvation of the Lord? Because I don't really get to see it if I'm always trying to save myself, or I'm trying to figure things out for myself. And so even if, in my current context, I'm not getting persecuted in any significant way.
Sure.
But there are still things in my life that I have choices of the path to take, of trying to figure something out, conjure something out up for myself, or if I'm willing to wait patiently and see the faithfulness, the salvation of the Lord, whether that's in something where maybe I'm trying to justify myself or like explain myself or make something happen for myself for my future. Like even in those things, there's always like this option of, am I going to rely on my own strength or wait to see the strength and the salvation of the Lord? Just to bring it on like a practical level of, you know, I want to be prepared to be in that place. There's a possibility my future holds something like that.
Sure.
But even in the here and now, I can still experience the strength and the power and the salvation and the grace of the Lord. Like if I choose to actually receive that and choose the path where the Lord gets to be the Lord.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. For someone who maybe they're listening to this and they're like, what, like my life is pretty comfortable.
Yeah.
Is there anything that I can do practically to help myself? Should I like bring on to myself pain? Is that what you're saying I should do to better prepare myself? Or like, how can I better prepare myself for the suffering that Jesus promises is coming for every believer who truly is following him? I mean, before you answer that, let's just read this passage just so people don't think we're just making this up.
Yeah.
You know, Jesus talks about in Matthew 24, he says in verse 5, he says, many will come in my name saying I'm the Christ. They will lead many astray. He's talking about in the last days, in the days leading up to his return. Go down to verse 9. It says, then they will deliver you up to tribulation, and they will put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. So there's several different things that he's hitting on that are going to take place. And like you mentioned earlier, and we talked about with some of those heroes, these things are already happening.
Yeah.
In most places in the world, actually. America has been, exempt from much of this suffering, but you talk to the church in China or you talk to the church in Africa with Heidi Baker, and it's quite literal, They don't have to really imagine very hard what it would be like because they are living it.
Yeah.
Friends of theirs are getting killed for the sake of the gospel. People are getting betrayed and sold out and imprisoned and whatever. So we see glimpses of it in the West, but it is coming to the West too.
Yeah.
America will not be exempt forever from these things.
Yeah. And
it's not like we're talking about this. It's not like we want these things to happen by any means. I don't want to suffer if I don't have to be honest with you. But I have to, at the end of the day, we have to take what the scriptures say seriously. And if Jesus is saying these things will happen, it's only a matter of time, then yes, I'm going to keep trying to advance the kingdom the best that I can. But I also have to begin to have honest conversations with the Lord in my own heart. And there's different ways in which I need to begin to prepare myself. And when I say prepare myself, I am mostly talking about in my heart. I'm not really talking about storing up canned goods.
Yeah.
I mean, if you do that, then that's like more power to you, brother. But I'm like, whenever these things come, I don't want to be offended, actually. Mm-hmm. I don't want to begin to experience suffering in myself or my family members start to experience it, and I don't have a grid for this.
Yeah.
In my relationship with the Lord.
Yeah.
Because that's extremely dangerous, and I think that will lead to many being offended and falling away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's really all you can practically do is prepare your heart to receive whatever may come. Like, I think just familiarize yourself with the scriptures, because the church in America has done a disservice to preparing us for suffering, because we've preached the 10 steps to make your life better, the 10 steps to get to your destiny, like all these things basically, you know, to your own success, and the end is kind of just God blessing you in this life. And the Lord does bless us in this life. But I mean, it's pretty hard to get through a book without faithful men and women suffering for the name of the Lord, for the sake of the gospel.
You mean this book?
Just the Bible, if you've heard of it.
Oh, any of the books in the book.
Yeah, just the books of the book. But yeah, I mean, like Jesus talks about it, Paul talks about it, the prophets talk about it, like experienced it, not just talk about it, experienced it, lived it. And so I think even this mentality of when something like bad happens or inconvenient happens or suffering happens or sickness happens, we're like, oh, like, God, what are you trying to teach me? And it's like, is this discipline? Is this, like, why is this happening? How could you allow this to happen? It's like pain and tribulation, like, come in this life. That's promised. It's not even just like, hey, it might happen. It's like, it will.
Right.
And so I think we've just kind of fed a lot of these mentalities that are vastly unhelpful to any grid of suffering. And like, we have Jesus, our high priest, who sympathizes with us, who understands us. He experienced suffering. And there's so many things about being joined with him in his suffering, that we might be joined with him in the resurrection, that we might be joined with him in his life. And so it's really hard biblically to get away from any grid of life of suffering and know right now my life doesn't look like Brother Young. Like, I haven't been imprisoned.
You haven't had your ears shrivel up to like raisins?
Not yet, no. But like, I've had suffering in this life, and I've got to fellowship with the Lord in those places. I've got to experience his strength, his salvation, his redemption. And I don't look at those things and I'm like, God, what the heck? Why did you do that to me? I've actually gotten to learn to fellowship with him there and know that it actually produces a greater weight of glory, the eternal weight of glory. And so I think we just need to like get prepared. And I think a good way is reading the Word of God, literally,
100%.
because you get to see you get to see that everywhere. And then it's not just like, oh, it's trendy to suffer, or is wrong to suffer. You just get to see like this is what happens on this side of eternity. But it's unto glory.
And I think, you know, the answer to preparing for suffering, I think, is found in Matthew chapter 25, the very next chapter, where he gives the parable of the 10 virgins. And basically the principle from that parable is, make sure you have oil in your lamp. In other words, make sure you have fresh intimacy with the Lord. Because intimacy with the Lord is going to be a key thing to helping us navigate through the different trials and tribulations that are promised to come. If we don't have fresh intimacy and we don't know his heart, we don't know his mind, we don't trust that he is good, we don't trust his leadership, we will be shaken by the things that are coming. You know, I'm just reminded, I had a very intense dream at the beginning of December. I'm not going to share it right now because it's very long, but I am going to share it on our YouTube channel so you can keep your lookout for it. But so much of the dream was the Lord bringing alive Matthew 24, actually, and showing me these things are coming. They're coming soon. And he let me feel the weight of some of the things, the deep betrayals, the love of many growing cold, the people falling away, lawlessness increasing, all of those things. I saw them and felt them in the dream, and really feel like it just pulled some of these verses off the page, made it very real to me. And I think it goes together just with all of the other things that he has shown me over the last few weeks and highlighted, emphasized to me. And I just feel this fresh conviction to begin to preach and talk about the full counsel of the Lord. You know, we did that episode back. That was the last episode we did, I'm pretty sure. You and I, Charissa, talking about the full counsel and how he is the God of abundant life and of blessing. And in the midst of that too, so that's a part of, he promises that for our journeys with him, abundance in life, fullness of joy, pleasures forevermore. And then he also promises that suffering will be a part of the journey of the believer. And I feel greatly convicted to just emphasize that part of, of what the Lord promises.
Yeah.
Just as I love to emphasize, everything else.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, this conversation is very ongoing.
Yes.
If you're listening to this and you are like, man, this is, I've never even read Matthew 24. I've never heard of some of these ideas. I want to encourage you guys to begin to just pour over the scriptures as you go through some of these verses. Dialogue with Jesus in the midst of it. I love to read a verse at a time and then ask the Lord, what do you say about this? Open up your heart and see if he will begin to walk you through these passages and teach you on different things. But there's lots of different resources out there that are talking about these concepts. A lot of teachings at IHOP specifically about this concept. If you ever want to look up Matthew or Mike Bickle, End Times Teachings, if this is something that you're thinking about just from this conversation, you want to hear more about. But man, we must be prepared. We must be prepared. And I think it's the Lord's kindness to alert us to these things ahead of time, right? We have the luxury of being on the side of, I'm not really suffering much right now. Well, so now we have this window of time to be prepared and to begin the Lord to highlight areas where we need to grow in so that we will not be shaken when the day comes.
Yeah.
And I believe it is coming.
It
is. So anyways, take what you've heard Chris and I talk about over the last 30 minutes. Talk about this with your friends. Talk about it with the different people in your life. Begin to dialogue with them, dialogue with the Lord, and don't let this be the last time you talk the sufferings of Jesus.
Yeah, I think ultimately no one's asking you to be in a context you're not in, but just wherever you find yourself, whatever trial or difficulty that you find yourself in, just to begin to count the cost afresh.
Yes,
and
that's so
learn
good.
To fellowship with him in those places. Ask him to refine you. Learn to depend on the Spirit, and all things. Just keep Jesus as the prize. Like, assess that with the Lord. Like, are you my prize?
Wow.
Are you my aim? Because if he is, that is the only way we will endure, is if he is truly the prize, if he's truly, if we know the inheritance that we have, that gives us the confidence and the hope and the endurance in the midst of whatever it is we may be finding ourselves in.
100%. And the Comforter, the Holy Spirit, will walk with you every step of the way.
That's right.
Right? Okay, guys. Well, let's wrap this conversation up. This has been Jesus People having Jesus conversations to provoke greater love for Jesus. Stay tuned with us. We're going to have some more episodes out down the road. See ya.